Welcome to Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE 5th Edition, Cause, Effect, and Contagious. Training materials include pens, post-it notes, pencils, markers, Wi-Fi technology integration, sticky chart paper, notebook paper, the ACE assessment or test, QR code scanners, and possible use of cell phones. Our learning targets today include educators will be able to identify and understand the four realms of ACE, self reflect regarding the impact that each realm has, the impact on personal and professional life, demonstrate and foster a trauma informed classroom experience, and model resilient strategies conducive for scholars to learn, grow, and thrive. We know that when we learn, we earn, um, and when we have a clear target, then we'll get where we're trying to go. Our Do Now activator. In order to prime ourselves for learning, look at the following quote: agree, disagree, and why or why not. Trauma is not the bad things that happen to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. This quote we want you to reflect on and see if you agree or disagree. Be prepared to share your answer. Go ahead and write down your response and reflect on why you agree and or disagree with this quote. Now, as you cast your vote, go ahead and stand up and stand to the right side of the room if you agree, and stand to the left side of the room if you disagree. If you're sitting in a chair, you can lean to the right or you can lean to the left to cast your vote. Okay? We're going to also show you another quote. And so, right where you are, just pause for a minute. This next quote says, if you never heal from what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who did not cut you. Anonymous. Agree or disagree? Stand to the right if you agree, or stand to the left side of the room if you disagree. And if you're seated, you can lean to the left or lean to the right to cast your vote. Now, once you're done, thank you for casting your vote. Now, go ahead and return to your seat, and you can feel free to reflect and or discuss with someone what your thoughts are about these quotes and why you agree and or disagree. Now, for the self-reflection, we want you to make this personal now. We're going to conduct a quick write. Quick writes are short activities where you have a chance to self reflect and to get your thoughts down on a piece of paper before verbalizing it and or sharing it with anyone else. So, what is an emotional or physical wound that you healed? How did this get accomplished? So, again, think about an emotional or physical wound that you healed or that now you're healed from. An emotional wound could be a betrayal. It could be something that occurred, anything that caused an emotional, some type of emotional harm to you. Physical wound. It could be a scar that you have. How did that get healed? What was the process? Go ahead and write that down in your journal or on a note sheet of notebook paper. And we will constantly refer back to this throughout the training and ask you to reflect back on the process. Healing is important and a very powerful thing. And sometimes it really is important for us to remember how we heal from things and what our healing process is. This will better help to guide our scholars and their journey and what they need to support them leading out their own healing process. Go ahead and utilize the time to self reflect and pause the video if you need to. Trauma. What is trauma? According to the American Psychological Association, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, such as an accident, rape, or a natural disaster. Trauma is a deeply distressing or overwhelming experience that can have a significant impact on a person's mental, emotional, and physical well being. Types of trauma. During this session, we will discuss trauma. There are different types of trauma, so let's explore what type of trauma would we consider the wound that we just reflected about that was healed. So, types of trauma. There are three different types of trauma that we will discuss today: acute, complex, and chronic. Take notes. Acute trauma results from a single isolated event, while chronic trauma stems from repeated or prolonged exposure to traumatic experiences. And complex trauma involves multiple or interpersonal traumatic events leading to a more severe or long lasting impact. For example, acute trauma might include, but is not limited to, resulting from a single or isolated event such as a car accident, natural disaster, or a violent attack. It can have both short term and long term consequences. Chronic trauma. Again, this develops from repeated or prolonged exposure to traumatic events such as domestic violence, abuse, and ongoing exposure to war or violence. The effects of chronic trauma are often accumulative, as each event can reinforce the negative impact of previous traumas. For example, long term physical or sexual abuse, military combat, or living in a war torn area. Complex trauma involves multiple, often interpersonal traumatic events, particularly during childhood, and the impact of these experiences on the individual can lead to more severe or long lasting impact on mental health and well being, often associated with childhood abuse, neglect, or abandonment, but can also result from any situation that makes a person feel persistent terror, fear, or hopelessness with no chance of escape. For example, a child experiencing multiple forms of abuse, neglect, and exposure to violence, often within the context of interpersonal relationships, meaning relationships by those individuals responsible for their care and well being. Go ahead and take some time to take notes and to really connect with each of these three. Quick write, self reflect. Which of the three types of trauma was the wound that you identified? Was it acute, complex, or chronic? Where in your physical body does distress develop and or live? Is it in your stomach, your shoulders, your neck? How do you decrease and or rid your body from the consequences of trauma? How do you detox? Go ahead and utilize the timer and journal. What are your strategies? What is your process? And respond to the following questions. Pause the video if you need more time. Now, now that we've defined the following three types of trauma, and you've identified in your personal scar or wound the type of trauma it is, we're going to identify what type of trauma does the following situation foster. For example, a family of 5 lost their house and possessions in a fire or a natural disaster. We want you to vote with your feet. Stand up and vote with your feet, meaning stand in front of the number 1, 2, or 3 to submit your answer. This situation, a family of 5 lost their house and possessions in a fire or a natural disaster. Do you believe that to be acute trauma, complex trauma, or number 3, chronic trauma? Stand up and vote with your feet. Wonderful. Or you can lean, if you're sitting, lean to the left, to the middle, or to the right to submit your answer as well. Now, now that we have your answers submitted, we want you to think about this. We want you to think about the type of trauma that you identify. Was it easy? Was it a challenge? Did you have more questions? Was there more information that you wanted to know that's not available, right? When you think about the 5 family members, we don't know their ages, right? We don't know their background. We don't know their previous experiences. We don't know what happened after this situation. Did they recover? Were they supported? Are they still in a position of being displaced? Um, um, did their lives have to completely pick up and did they have to relocate, right? And so all of these questions are really important when we're thinking about how this trauma impacted this family, right? If it's a small child, perhaps it did turn into more of that complex trauma, right? Maybe it was an isolated incident and it was a baby, and so the baby was too young to even remember how it might have impacted to them. So maybe it was just an acute trauma. It seemed to be an isolated incident. We moved on, we recovered, we relocated, insurance kicked in, and we just started our lives over. And I was too young to even know of the impact that it had on me, right? Or maybe the adults and maybe the adults it became more chronic trauma, and the adults really because of their stress they because of their stress, perhaps the children were impacted by how the adults process that stress. Maybe the adults started bad habits and having vices like alcoholism or doing things to recover their lives that might have landed someone in jail, right? And maybe that changed the the trajectory of the family's stress levels, and maybe regular stress turned into toxic stress. So we don't know the impact of this trauma. But definitely, this type of trauma, it could have a variety of ways in which it impacted this family. So, can this traumatic situation reflect all 3 types? How? Who or what determines this? These are some questions we want you to think about. Consider each family member and how each individual may have processed the disaster. Consider how you healed from your wound. How different do your close family members process stress and problems? Just as their process is different, and how they process stress is different. So we want to think about that. We all have a process. We all process stress different, and we all have a recovery process. And the needs that we need to recover are very different as well. And so it's really hard to determine how this situation impacted this family. But a family of 5 lost their house and possessions in a fire or a natural disaster. And so it could be, it's an isolated event. It's a natural disaster. So it's definitely acute trauma, right? But also it depends on how they process it that determines if it's going to be a chronic trauma, and or if it's going to be a complex trauma. Maybe the children, this will become a complex trauma for them in childhood, and it may, if the adults are experiencing this as a chronic trauma, it's having some lifelong uh, impact on them. Their chronic trauma can, put the children in the family in a position where it's becoming a complex trauma. So just something to think about. Now, we have another scenario. Check for understanding. A child was severely injured in a car crash while the mother was driving. Think about this. Vote with your feet. Stand in front of number 1, acute trauma, number 2, complex trauma, or number 3, chronic trauma to determine which type of trauma is represented in this scenario. Okay, so we're giving you some time to think about your response. From the child's experience, this could be acute if the child was very young and doesn't remember the details as they age. The situation could become complex trauma if the event left internal emotional scars and or PTSD symptoms, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, if they arise as reminders, as reminders of similar type events occur in their mind, right? Maybe a sound, a smell, something, a short memory could come back to them, and it could cause some of that PTSD. Perhaps the child gets scared and screams whenever the mother places him or her in the car, or develops a belief that maybe women are just not good drivers. Perhaps the child was paralyzed, or the mother was intoxicated when she was driving, and as a result, the child was paralyzed. So now the consequence of that is the child's lifestyle is completely changed. The child lost the ability, mobility from the accident. Maybe they were hit by a drunk driver, and there's another party involved. Perhaps the mother is riddled with guilt and succumbs to negative coping mechanisms that really impacts their quality of life. Man, with all of these things to think about, something can start out as acute trauma, but how the individuals and the parties involved, how they process that trauma, if they don't have any strategies or support system, it really can determine if an acute situation, a traumatic event that's acute, could absolutely turn into something that could be complex or chronic. Something that we want you to think about when it comes to trauma. Trauma is just not, there's the big T of trauma, type 1 trauma, there's type 2 trauma, and there's absolutely you as a caregiver and an educator, as you support our scholars through their process, we want to make sure too that you're not experiencing secondhand trauma. Now, the first thing is we want to make sure that you've done your pre-work and you've taken the ACE questionnaire. And typically that's 10 questions, 10 questions that focus on abuse, neglect, abuse and neglect. The QR code is here if you need to take it, or definitely there's a link that will be provided to you, or even a sheet of paper by your trainer that will be given to you to support you in taking the assessment. Now, when it comes to trauma and or toxic stress, does it really impact our scholars? Absolutely. It impacts the brain, it impacts their everything that we do in trying to support our scholars learning. Adverse childhood experiences and or ACE, it can significantly impact a child's developing brain, leading to changes in structure and function, particularly in areas related to stress response, emotion regulation, and memory, potentially impacting long-term health and well-being. Well, we know in the classroom, our scholars, we need them to recall what they learned the day before. We want to build on their prior learning, but what happens if they don't recall what they learned this morning and it's just after lunch? What happens if they don't remember what we learned yesterday? What happens when there's a moment of I'm getting upset right now and I really am having a hard time calming myself down? Mm-hmm. ACE impacts that greatly in our scholars. So how ACE affects the brain? ACE, it can overactivate a child's stress response system, leading to chronic fight or flight state, which can damage the developing brain. As you see on the screen, you'll see the difference between a healthy brain and a brain that has experienced toxic stress. The activity of a healthy brain is vibrant, it's full, there's connection there, there's the brain is functioning as it should. Where you see the toxic stress, the brain that has experienced toxic stress, there's a lot of areas that are not bright and vibrant. And so the hippocampus, the way that ACE impacts it, it can reduce the size and impair the functioning of that area, the hippocampus, a brain region crucial for memory and learning. So our scholars We're going to have to constantly use music, engagement, and movement for our scholars to remember things. So moving their hands, moving their bodies, saying things, call and response, that will help them with their memory. The prefrontal cortex, it's responsible for executive functions like decision making and self regulation. So when I'm upset, they may struggle to cool themselves down. So they'll need strategies on how to cool down, how to know how to reflect, how to know how to ask for and advocate for a timeout, how to journal and get detox all of those negative emotions through writing or drawing or meditation or movement, and healthy use of their hands and their feet. Amygdala. The amygdala involved in processing emotions, particularly fear, can become hyperactive, leading to heightened anxiety and difficulty managing their emotions. So when our scholars go from 0 to 10, a lot of times they're experiencing, again, a toxic stress response. And so if you've taken the ACE questionnaire, it focuses on adverse childhood experiences, meaning experiences that occurred in the household. And so that's verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, maybe separation of a loved one through because of divorce or separation, or maybe even sometimes death, physical abuse of a parent, alcohol or drug abuse by a parent, mental illness of a parent, or the incarceration of a parent. This is an example of an A score, 8 out of 10. That means this person says yes, they experienced this from between the ages of 18 or in birth. 8 of these, if they answered yes to, their score is an 8 out of 10. This is a pretty high score. So what we want you to reflect on is, what is your ACE score? Which of the household ACEs still impact you today? And if so, how? Does it impact you professionally or personally? Which of the household ACEs still impacts you today? If so, how? This is your personal reflection, and we're not going to ask you to share it. Round 2, adverse community experiences. Round 2 is how your community environment really impacts your stress levels. Poverty. Go ahead and identify which of these in round 2 of ACE really had an impact on you. And you're simply going to put yes or no, or you're just going to jot down which of these definitely had an impact. So on your note-taking guide, if that's something where you grew up in that between the ages of 18 and birth, or birth and 18 years of age, if poverty really, if that's something you experience, write that down, because that is a trauma. Discrimination or racism, if you experience that. Violence or peer rejection. Poor housing quality and affordability. So maybe your family moved around a lot. Sexism, lack of social capital, meaning maybe jobs were scarce, right? Or people, counseling and resources were scarce. Lack of economic mobility, that's jobs and wages. Food scarcity, maybe there wasn't a healthy food. The corner store only has snacks and high things and high sugar and high salt. Poor quality schools and curriculum. Again, which of the community ACEs still impacts you today? If so, how? Professionally or personally? Pause the video and take some time to reflect. Round 3, climate, adverse climate experiences. Look at the following checklist, and we want you to reflect and go deeper. How has the climate impacted you between the ages of birth and 18? When you think about individuals who were impacted by COVID-19, individuals who were impacted by hurricanes that displaced families, or families might have had to move. So natural disasters and things, right? This realm of ACE is something we want you to reflect on as well. So if you experience record heat or droughts, maybe water was a resource that wasn't accessible, wildfires and smoke, In the United States, we know a lot of our uh, West Coast states really experience a lot of trauma because of the wildfires and smoke. Sea level rise, tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, poor water or air quality, record storms, flooding, and mudslides, volcano eruptions and tsunamis, pandemics such as COVID 19 or the measles outbreaks, and different types of things, and we have other natural disasters. Which of the climate ACEs still impacts you today? How? Professionally or personally? Pause the video and take some time to reflect. And round four, adverse cultural experiences. Look at the following list, and as I read them aloud, write down any of these who definitely impacted you between birth and 18. And then, yes, we're going to ask you to see which of these still have an impact today. It could be a positive impact or a negative impact. We have genocide, slavery or segregation, colonization, forced family separation, destruction of culture, intergenerational trauma, toxic masculinity or sexism, harmful social norms. Which of the cultural ACEs still impacts you today? And if so, how? So up here, this is between birth and 18 years of age. But down here, we want you to reflect about, do any of these still impact you today? Are there any things that trigger you when you're in certain environments and you realize, wow, there's still some residue of trauma there for me? Because if you're triggered, there's residue of your trauma. Pause the video if you need more time to reflect. Now that we've had time to reflect through all four realms of ACE, we want to summarize the reflection process, so please consider which realm impacts you the most. Going back to the wound that you healed, which realms are connected to that wound? Whether it was a physical wound or an emotional wound. We also want you to think about when you, a scholar, family member, or a fellow coworker are experiencing a traumatic moment. How might considering the four realms of trauma help us better to support one another? Sometimes what we're seeing is not because of things that are occurring in our household. Perhaps it could be things that are happening in our community. Perhaps it could be climate related. Perhaps it could be cultural or traditional things from our history or our past that could be impacting what we're seeing and what we're experiencing during a traumatic moment. Case study, Derek's story. Let's utilize our skills to support a sample scholar. Listening activity, cause, effect, and contagious. Watch the following video and observe any childhood, climate, community, and or cultural ACE indicators. Be prepared to share your observation and discuss which realms might be at work in Derek. Also, consider how the parents are impacted by trauma and how this might shape how they train/rear their son, Derek.
Good morning. How are you?
Cool.
So, can we talk about how you got here?
She made jokes. Yeah, you think I got a funny looking face? I just thought it was funny.
Hey kids, I'm telling you, come right here.
Man, we ain't doing nothing.
Boy, right here before I'm called cops.
So, you didn't do anything?
Nope.
Then what's all this?
Depends on who's reading it, I guess.
Well, looks broken. Skateboarding, huh?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've hurt yourself?
No, I get hurt all the time.
At home?
At home? He hurt himself skateboarding at the park.
Okay, ma'am. I'm gonna have a counselor come in and speak with you.
A counselor? For what? He's okay.
Well, I done told you them tricks were gonna put you in the hospital.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too. A nurse will be in a few minutes to help you check out.
What's up?
That doctor thought I did this to him.
How you doing?
Hi.
It ain't fair.
Fair has nothing to do with this. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. Look, I know so many young men just like you that didn't do anything. And yet, most of them are in prison.
You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison.
If you don't want to end up in prison, you're going to have to get some new priorities and probably some new friends, too. Look, you're not getting any younger. You need to get an education so you can get a good job.
Like you just like everybody else. You think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see.
I see what's in this folder. It shows me what you've been doing.
I ain't doing nothing.
I am not doing anything. Stop!
I ain't doing nothing.
I'm not doing anything. And yes, you were. Get to the timeout chair. Now, please. I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Take some time to reflect on what you just saw and remember, what did you observe? Were there any childhood experiences, climate, community, and or cultural ACE indicators? Which of the four rounds of ACE were present in Derek's case study? How and why? Pause the video and take some time to reflect. Now that you've had some time to reflect, stand up or sit down. So this exercise you can do whether virtual or in person. Stand up if you believe that realm one, household adverse childhood experiences, were present as a part of Derek's story, possibly his parents and or in this situation. Only base your understanding based on what was observed and or some possible historical indicators for him and his family's demographic group. All right, now sit down. Stand up or take off if you believe round two, adverse community experiences, were present in Derek's story. Wonderful. Okay, sit down. Now, round three. To continue our poll, stand up if you believe adverse climate experiences were present in Derek's experience. All right, now sit down. And then lastly but not least, round four, adverse cultural experiences. Stand up if you believe adverse cultural experiences played a role in Derek's experience, him and his family. All right, touchdown. The following realms were observable in realm 2 when Derek was in middle school and kindergarten. Realm 4 was observable in elementary school and preschool. Think about the specific experiences where Derek was recalling and going down memory lane where he could really identify community impact for him and cultural impact. When you look at round 2 and round 4, perhaps you were able to identify some possible round 1 or round 3 indicators. But these were the most noticeable and observable based on the video. So in middle school, Derek was hanging out with friends in front of the local store. That posed as a community threat. Just hanging out with his friends, the store owner didn't like that type of image, and so he saw the young men as a threat. This is so common with our young African American scholars, where they don't even feel like they can be themselves and be free to be in their communities without everyone seeing them as a threat. In kindergarten, being punished without cause or being heard. So his kindergarten teacher didn't, he says he didn't do nothing. She was more focused on the double negative in his verbiage than she was really asking both scholars what happened. She took away voice for him, and she automatically defaulted that he was the challenge or the threat, and the other scholar was somehow the victim, and that feeds into a stigma about how people view young African American males. There's also tons of research about how elementary and specifically young elementary educators tend to view African American males. Harvard and a lot of different prestigious articles mention that stigma exists amongst educators, and we want to make sure that we're stopping that. We are removing our bias. We're becoming aware of it, acknowledging it so that we can do something about it. And then round 4, we have in elementary school, at the doctor's office, the parents, they might be experiencing some trauma that might cause them to be defensive, that might cause them to watch their words. As the parental custody was threatened when the doctor says that a social worker was going to come in the room because he believed that the accident, the frequent accident the young man was having was possibly due to abuse by the parent. It wasn't until the father walked in the room and confirmed that the tricks could possibly injure him. That's when the doctor, found some belief. There might be some trauma or triggers from the mom that, as a woman's voice, she wasn't believed. But when a child comes in and has a mother and a father, then wow, that adds some validity. So perhaps that could have impacted the mother in her sense of security, that her voice isn't respected as much as a male's voice. Her having a husband provided an extra level of protection for her. But most importantly, their parental custody was threatened at that moment of the potential allegation of abuse. And then in preschool, we have family time. At the park, parents they didn't, the other parent didn't engage or permit their young, her young daughter to engage with Derek at a young age. So that's rejection, the experience of rejection, the parents experiencing the other parent not wanting to even greet them by saying hello, right? And specifically removing their child so that they wouldn't have to engage in this family dynamic. Now, we don't know if it was racial. We don't know if it's, because maybe they're a family unit and maybe this mom is just going through something. We don't know. But, what it's sometimes the space and the lack of communication that allows the space for people to fill in the gaps of how they're experiencing situations, right? So, you know, something to think about. Derek's experiences, Derek's mother and his father's experiences as well. And how do these things shape how they parent Derek? How do these things shape how they experience the world, how they navigate this trauma, and how they perceive their sense of safety and security in the world? So, do they have a shared cause and effect? Is it contagious? Is Does mom and dad's trauma become the child's a new lesson for the child and how they view the world, how they navigate the world? Feel free to pause the video and just reflect a little bit um, on Derek's case study and his experience. If you need more time, pause the video. But let's remember, trauma is not the bad things that happen to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. Let's also remember the quote, if you never heal from what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. So each of us must support our scholars. We must support our scholars and ensure that we are not bleeding on them and that we have strategies to help them deal with what is happening on the inside as a result of what has happened. And we want to make sure that we are regulated equally. So we want to help scholars and empower them. We want to have them understand that they are in control of their responses, their actions, their thoughts, their choices. So we want to empower them by giving them some concrete strategies, but we also want you as the educator to be aware and to do your healing work as well. A scholar's trauma and their triggers is not an excuse as to why you're triggered and you are unregulated in your interactions in within your work with the scholars and their families. So we want to stretch this a little bit. Which types of triggers and trauma have Derek, his mother, and father experienced? Is it acute? Is this complex? Or is this chronic? Go ahead and pause the video and reflect. Be prepared to discuss. Now, as educators, we should be mindful that a scholar's verbal and nonverbal communication speaks volumes. Let's remain supportive to their stress-related responses. And so as you think about this for Derek, was his trauma acute? He had someone could easily say, first of all of these occurrences for him happened between the ages of birth and 18. He's not yet 18 years old yet. And so for him, these are ACE-related experiences, but in which realm? So we have some community experiences. He's learning. He's been learning throughout his life what the world thinks about him, what specific people think about him. Most of his experiences have been with people who don't look like him, and really seeing that, wow, people that don't look like me, perhaps I'm not safe around them. Perhaps they don't have high expectations for me. Perhaps they only think that jail, and me not being successful, that is my journey, that is my destiny. And what does this do for him? This puts him in a place where when he's not around individuals possibly who doesn't look like him, his nonverbals don't indicate joy. So let's look at some of his nonverbals. We have signs. He sighs a lot. There's eye rolls. He tries to avoid eye contact. He's used to being accused, so he constantly shows up in a defensive manner. That's his fight, flight, or freeze response. He definitely has learned to stick up for himself. He's used to being punished. Even with running away from the police, people often say, well, if you're not guilty, why would you run away from the police? He's been conditioned that, again, to be on defense because that's how the world sees me. Then clearly I'm always the one doing something wrong. And we see that in this visual expression of him in his younger years and how he's become, why his disposition is what it is now. And then we have his words. When our scholars are venting or they're saying certain things, words have meaning. There's purpose behind it. He'll say, cool, bro, we ain't doing nothing. No, I get hurt all the time. He learned that telling the truth to this doctor put his parents at risk of losing custody. Something as simple as telling the truth is not a good thing when you're talking to people that don't look like him. This can be a harmful belief process, right? But it's something that his experiences have taught him. It does not make it true, but it makes it his reality. And so it's important for us to listen to our scholars. What are their belief system? Some of the things he said, it depends on who's reading it, right? He already recognizes that this world or certain people are biased against him. It ain't fair. So he has an understanding that certain people win and certain people don't. This is not a fair process that he's working in. School is not fair. You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison, meaning people have already dictated his future. And so these are just some of the things that we want to listen to our scholars, and the trauma is there. He sees people, this is how he believes the world views him. So now, trauma strategies. Let's close our session by unpacking strategies to support traumatic experiences that may occur in our classroom. And so we want to walk away with some strategies. And so the first thing is this iceberg, right? When we see certain things in our classroom, we're only seeing a little bit. We're seeing the visible behavior, but we don't see what's happening on the inside. What's happening underneath, right? Derek, we were able to see his flashbacks. When our scholars are triggered and they're having PTSD moments like Derek did, where he remembered those moments of injustice for him, right? And we were able to watch that in a video, but we don't get that with our scholars. That's the rest of the story. Now, how do we get to the rest of the story? Okay. The rest of the story really can be broken down. That iceberg can be broken down here. So these are the events that are visible for us. This is what we can observe through behavior and through our scholars' actions. This tells us what's happening. We don't say what's wrong, we say what's happening. So step one, is that it's easy to make mistakes and or assumptions. So we want to commit to asking our scholars questions and listening to them in order to build healthy, equitable relationships. So as we've seen in this video example, our biases can cause chronic, complex, or acute harm. Our intentions do not matter if our impact causes someone to be cut and wounded. So looking at the graphic, right, it helps us to support a trauma-informed, scholar-supportive environment. So when a situation arises, we want to avoid saying what's wrong, because that sounds like, again, it sounds like who's wrong or being bad. It sounds like a judgment. It sounds like a diagnosis instead of really you seeking to find out what's happening right now, what's happening emotionally, what happened physically, if there was some kind of physical altercation, right? But either way, it's something is happening right now, and our goal is to find out what that is. Then we want to dig deeper. The only way to get to what we don't see, what's brewing on the inside, right, underneath that iceberg underneath the surface of that iceberg that's not visible is what's been happening over time, right? What's the prolonged activity and behaviors? What are the patterns and the trends? We want to identify what are the patterns and the trends. We do that by saying, man, what's been happening over time? We got to do some time travel, right? What's influencing the behavior or trend? So are there some underlying structures, the structures that reinforce or encourage the pattern, right? And for Derek, what were those things? What were the underlying structures? And then what beliefs stimulate that behavior? Through his words, we can see what he believes about the world that he lives in. He believes the world that he lives in is not a safe place for him, and that he's expected not to be successful. He's expected to go to prison. He's expected because of the friends or where he hangs out or how he speaks. He's expected to really become a stereotype or a stigma. So we have to remove judgments or diagnoses that scholars are bad, right? Patiently wait and ask the right questions and commit to seeing our scholars as individuals in distress. Again, what would have changed in Derek's story if his preschool teacher saw him as a scholar in distress? Middle school, scholar in distress. The store owner. These are just young men wanting a safe place to hang out, laugh, and be themselves, right? What happens if the minds of the adults in this situation would have shifted a little bit? And so we don't see things as they are. We often see them as we are. And so question becomes is, do we want to, provide a safe space and place for our scholars, or do we want to be like some of maybe our past experiences where we've experienced adults who've judged us, experienced adults who were not cheering for us and champions for us and wanting the best for us? And so, step one is to first do our own work, self-reflect, make sure we're asking the right questions. Step two is trauma. We want to make sure that there's a support system for our scholars. So step two, we want to establish that support system for our scholars. So we're going to model that and how this works by you writing who was a part of your support system when you healed the wound that you identified at the start of the training. So we want you to think about it. You healed your wound. I don't know if it was an emotional wound. We don't know if it was a physical one, but think about who was involved in your healing process. You had a support system. What was that? And so this one is all about you. And so when we identify a support network for our scholars, we don't want, see, the good thing about Derek is he had a support system. He had his parents. They were very supportive. They were there. They were present with him. He had both parents at least available in his life. And so our scholars need to know who their inner circle of support is. And so that's the closest to you that you can turn to when you can't get past something yourself. That could be your family, a caregiver, a spouse, a partner, your children, or perhaps siblings, as an example. Then we want you to identify who's in that middle circle. These are people who you can turn to for additional support. That might be friends, teachers, church, clubs, co-workers, etc. And then there's your outer circle. Professional help or others you can continue to reach out to for help that others in your inner circle or the other circles can't provide. And so this might be therapists, advocates, neighbors, acquaintances, or doctors/professionals. This is your outer circle. And so it's important for our scholars to know that they have 3 layers of support. If you hear a scholar utilize the word no one, no one, no one, I don't have anyone, no one, that means that they believe that their support system is very small, if at all, non-existent. So it's our job to help create a trauma-informed environment, to make sure our scholars at least have someone in that inner circle, middle circle, and that outer circle who they can count on to support them when they are having challenges. Pause the video for more time for you to reflect on your own support system. You being able to provide and to reflect on who was in your inner, middle, and outer circle absolutely gives you the strategy in step 2 to be able to help our scholars do the same thing. So remember to jot down this as a strategy as well. So step 1 is to ask the right questions. What's happening? What has been happening, right, in the past? Things like that. Step 2 is to help our scholars create a support network. remember they are scholars in distress and to view them as a scholar in distress. Step 3, we want to, in order to be trauma informed, we want to understand the different steps toward that and the different areas toward being trauma informed, trauma responsive, as well. And so, step 3, to become trauma informed, we have to enhance our emotional and we have to enhance the emotional and physical safety for scholars. We want to make sure that that they've experienced trust and trustworthy interactions, peer support, collaboration, and mutuality, empowerment and choice, and consideration for their culture, historical, and or gender issues that may play a role in their experiences and responses, as you see here on the example. Take a few minutes to read through the different topics and their descriptors. Pause the video if you need more time. Adopting a trauma informed approach is not accomplished through any single particular technique or checklist. It requires constant attention, caring awareness, sensitivity, and possibly a cultural change at an organizational level. The source is the CDC. Now, let's prepare. In the room, there should be 6 sheets of chart paper that we will place along the walls of the room, or perhaps on variety of tables or desks around the room. Entitle them Safety, Trust and Transparency, Peer Support, Collaboration and Mutuality, Empowerment and Choice, Cultural, Historical, and Gender Issues. Our materials will be 1 marker per educator. Step 2, place 6 sheets of sticky chart paper on the walls around the room. And step 3, entitle them the following 6 topics. So what will happen at this point is you will be asked to stand up and quickly write a strategy for your colleagues to utilize that will help our classrooms to be more trauma informed. Ready, set, go. You have 6 minutes. Once the timer has concluded, you should have as many strategies as possible for each of the 6 categories for how you would utilize trauma informed practices throughout our programming and with scholars. What are you personally going to do to ensure safety, trust and transparency, peer support, collaboration? This is how you create a trauma informed classroom space for scholars. This is how we create that at the classroom level and the school-wide level as well. Some examples for providing and creating a safe space in the classroom is to establish clear rules and behavior with scholars involving inappropriate language and making sure that scholars, their voices are heard for what would create that space of comfort for them. In some scholars' cultures, not saying anything or ignoring it means that you agree or that you are complicit. So sometimes, again, culturally, not saying anything can translate to some people as that you're in agreement. While other cultures, they're taught that no, not saying anything just means that I choose not to engage in this situation right now. Maybe I'm not going to participate. So something as simple as that, a non-response is a response, but how we translate what that non-response means, really our culture plays a huge role in that. So when it comes to safety, we want to make sure that we're listening with empathetic ears. We want to ask open-ended questions instead of defaulting on our own culture as being the primary source and resource that we use to determine other people's intentions. Be present in the moment and eliminate distractions. Don't give unsolicited advice. We want to reflect on what you heard. Use nonverbal communication to show that you're listening and leave space for silence. Silence isn't a bad thing. And so allow the silence sometimes to do the heavy lifting. According to research, Some ways to really support a safe environment is to own your mistakes. Students fear failure because it's human to feel failure. So point out your own mistakes and difficulties to the class and model positive self-talk. Another one is establishing clear rules and behaviors. In the early grades, especially, it's helpful to practice rules and expectations around concepts like sharing and listening. And so you want to clarify the non negotiables early on, such as no name calling or physical roughness, and let students know the consequences for breaking those rules. And then be consistent about applying the consequences. This should be a classroom discussion about what our community space agreements will be. So you can call them rules, you can call them community agreements, but allow it to be a community conversation. Confront language. Holding students accountable for the way in which they talk and joke about topics like gender identity, body image, and race are key parts of building a safe classroom community for schools. So we want to ensure that we're interrupting negative talk events when they happen, right? Any type of remarks that suggest, racial, demeaning students about their race, their spirituality, their gender, their sex, the way that they express, and or the way that they behave. Another strategy for trust and transparency. So to establish trust and transparency, it takes time and being consistent in following in the following areas. And so, which of these is most impactful to you in order to build trust? So here we have some ideas. Remember to connect from day to day. One, and build a responsive classroom, meaning ask the scholars about themselves, right? We trust people the more and more we get to know them, that we get to commune with them. So develop a middle range of voice, and we don't want your voice to be too strict. So, for example, one of the ideas says offer choices, give scholars a chance to choose and control things when they can. We want to give control, right? Do we trust someone that won't even allow us voice and space to have decision making power? Create a physically and emotionally safe learning environment, build rapport, get to know the scholars, show genuine interest in their hobbies, teach social skills, social emotional skills, promote a growth mindset, practice mindful awareness, be fully present with their thoughts and feelings. So we want to practice meditation, celebrate progress, respect boundaries, allow our scholars to set those boundaries, listen actively, give scholars full attention when they're talking, and show empathy. Let them know you see, hear, and understand them. So that day one connection is huge, and we want to make sure that you have activities where you can connect with scholars. Building responsive classrooms. So again, surveys. Survey your scholars. Find out what they like, what their interests are, who they admire, who are their heroes. Develop your tone of voice. So use your voice to manage the classroom. That's a powerful thing, your voice. If your voice is timid, too soft, then it might invite people to test boundaries or to assume you're making suggestions instead of telling scholars and leading them what you expect to happen. Peer support. Foster peer support by promoting interactions and making time to reflect just like we model today. Have the entire class engage in community time that includes breathing techniques and real discussions that scholars care about, which creates genuine connection. Scholars will begin to remind their classmates to help their fellow peers when a fellow peer becomes distressed. Establish collaboration and mutuality by ensuring that the learning and lessons have a personal connection. The more invested scholars will be. Help the shy scholars to connect with their peers by utilizing engagement strategies like some of the ones we've done in this training. Go deeper into the reflection time and ask scholars how they're doing for that emotional regulation. Be trauma informed and remember the four what is happening types of questions. Finally, be the calm that our scholars need. To empower and provide choice. You want to sit with your scholars, speak with them at eye level, check in with them daily, show them that you care about them, not just how well they perform in ELA and math. So sit with their scholars, commune with them, be a community member. You can provide daily check-ins for scholars who need more time and attention. Go to their desk. Hey, how are you doing? Check in with them at the top of the day, during lunch, and at the end of the day. That's a 60-second check-in. And there's some questions that we can provide for you that could support that process. But when it comes to choice, allow scholars to select the course, maybe a textbook that they're going to read that day, a video or a podcast they want to listen to and discuss. Students choose what topics or themes they want to explore. Allow students to ask questions and determine which questions are truly essential to them. Choice is not as hard as we make it. And so provide opportunities for them to voice their opinion. Cultural, historical, and gender issues. In order to emphasize that you care about your scholars, you must see their culture, historical and gender situations as a value, not a threat. And so if they feel like they're being judged in these areas, it definitely can come off as that you're not open to learning. You're not open to really, it's not safe to share who they are truly with you. So hang their work on the walls. This shows that you are like a proud parent who has the bumper sticker on the car. Audit books and classroom materials to ensure that they are represented in the curriculum. Can they see themselves in the curriculum? Can scholars see characters that look like them and have similar goals, dreams, and experiences? So we want to hang their work on the wall, make sure that we are constantly present and prepared to support them. Now we're going to see 3 trauma-informed practices that work by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris.
High doses of adversity can change the structure and function of children's developing brains, their developing immune system, their developing hormonal systems, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed. Those changes are what we now refer to as the toxic stress response. Okay, as a doctor, I may be the one who's screening for adverse childhood experiences, but I might see that child at the most, a couple times a year. But educators deliver the daily doses of healing interactions that truly are the antidote to toxic stress. And so the opportunity to do things like social emotional learning, to give children tools to understand how to recognize what's going on with them and then how to respond, especially to be able to calm their bodies down, truly is healing. If you have a child who is being defiant, who is acting out, who is having a terrible time with impulse control, especially if they're experiencing high doses of adversity at home, suspending them so that they can go home and be in that environment may be doing more harm than good. We obviously need school safety policies and policies to support the orderly functioning of the school environment. But things like in-school suspensions, things like restorative justice, literally the time and space to allow those adrenaline and cortisol levels to come down. And it could be 15 minutes to have, time and space in a quiet area to get back to self-regulation. That's a way to work with a child's biology instead of working against a child's biology. We have an overactive stress response. There's cortisol, there's adrenaline, there's all these stress hormones, and those are what leads to long-term harms. So I just went through the science and said, okay, well, what does the opposite? And it turns out that meditation, and I was skeptical at first, meditation helps to regulate the part of the brain associated with recovery post-provocation. It's associated with reduced levels of cortisol and other stress hormones, and also reduced physiologic indicators, things like blood pressure and heart rate. After reading that literature, I implemented a program in my clinical practice where we really taught mindfulness practices as part of our treatment protocol for kids with toxic stress.
So now, hopefully you were able to gather some great strategies and tips from our doctor and we revisit our learning targets, that you would be able to identify and understand the four realms of ACE, self-reflect regarding the impact that each realm has on personal and your professional life, demonstrate and foster a trauma-informed classroom experience. What are those steps? What are those strategies? And lastly, model resilient strategies conducive for scholars to learn, grow, and thrive. Our mission is accomplished. So now, our final reflection will ask you to commit. What are you committed to start, stop, and continue doing? List one thing that you will start doing, stop doing, and continue doing to positively impact scholar trauma, and why. Pause the video for more time. And finally, you're amazing. Thank you so much for engaging in this Adverse Childhood Experiences 5th edition, Cause, Effect, and Contagious. Because our scholars are experiencing adversity, it really impacts their brain internally, externally, and how they experience and navigate the world. We hope that you will be a positive light and a positive contagious that you will give and provide for our schools. Hashtag you are amazing. Hashtag thank you so much for all that you do in advance for our scholars and their families.